Pakistan. Lovers of cricket, the sport, and home to the youngest Nobel laureate and athlete with the longest winning streak. The country is famously in the news for its unending beef with India, amidst other challenges such as human rights problems, hyperinflation, and nationwide security issues. But perhaps the most worrying thing about present-day Pakistan is its economy. Years of political unrest and controversial policies have brought things to a head, and the economy rests on a nice edge. Something will have to give eventually, but what? Like herding cats. Pakistan is currently experiencing a nationwide electricity crisis. The grid is all but turned off, severing power supply to homes and industries. This isn't a problem of epileptic power supply, but instead shows a country with empty coffers. Unable to purchase coal and natural gas overseas to run its power plants and electric grid, the country with its over 240 million citizens has plunged into a blackout, leaving residents to fend for themselves. All over the nation, people are setting up diesel engines and generator sets to create power and provide water to run their homes and businesses. The situation, currently a pretty kettle of fish, has caused widespread shutdowns across businesses, factories, telecommunications companies, and even hospitals. Considering the option of alternate sources of power, you'd be forgiven for wondering why economic activities appear to be grounding to a halt. The problem is, by the day, more and more Pakistanis are becoming incapable of generating power for themselves. That's thanks to record high inflation, which has taken the country by storm, further worsening an already harrowing situation. The current inflation rate of 31.5% is on a 14-year streak and represents a new record since 1975. Interestingly, its effects are pretty unbiased, affecting every sector and income class of the country. However, the bottom class remains the hardest hit and can hardly afford the bare necessities. Another hiccup of outsourcing power to the people is the sky-high cost of petroleum products. Gasoline has more than tripled in value, currently sitting at an 80% price increase. Despite the abysmal cost, Pakistanis still have to endure endless queues at gas stations to get their hands on petroleum products. But it gets worse. In an effort to reduce the effects of the country's struggles, flour, a staple amongst the populace, has been subsidized. This move, despite its positive intent, comes at a desperate time. Besides the endless queue to get the product, Pakistanis also face the risk of losing their lives and being trampled to death when the crowd goes frantic. To make matters worse, nature also seems to have it in for the country, with the previous monsoon season leaving lasting effects. With over 8 million people displaced from their homes, the country suffered further losses, amounting to around $30 billion in lost output and damages. Add to that the increasing rate of homelessness and widespread poverty, with tens of millions of Pakistanis living on $3.20 or less daily, and you get an even more dismal picture. In southern regions of Asia, Pakistan's high inflation rate comes second only to Sri Lanka's, which sits at an eye-watering 51%. Pakistan would not want to toe this line for long, given that Sri Lanka is currently a bankrupt state with an upended government and a barely alive economy. What is to blame? Joining. There are lots of influencers to blame in the case of Pakistan, like poor economic management and planning on the part of the government. So it wasn't much of a surprise when the Pakistani rupee started to crash against the dollar. The rupee traded at an all-time low of 280 to a dollar, which wasn't helped by the country's declining foreign reserves. But the blame isn't entirely internal. The country's condition was worsened by external economic conditions, such as the rising costs of agricultural imports and global oil prices. What makes this cocktail of errors intriguing is the unique makeup of Pakistan. For one, it's one of the most populated countries in the world, coming in 5th in the rankings. This makes it prone to extremism and instability, especially as the country has one of the youngest democracies ever, which can be traced back to 2003. The cherry on top is that it's a nuclear-armed state. What all of that means is that Pakistan could very well be about to follow in Sri Lanka's footsteps. Where did it go wrong? The history of Pakistan's economic troubles isn't new. Due to its history of economic instability, the country has fallen into predictable patterns. For one, given its over-reliance on importation and the decline in foreign exchange entering the country, particularly US dollars, meant severe consequences for the balance of payment over the years. Additionally, Pakistan has been taking on massive debts too, receiving funding from China to construct important amenities, such as roads and power plants. However, in the case of no good deed going unpunished, Pakistan's efforts to stimulate local exports with their loans failed to yield tangible results. Although this trade deficit sounds like the final nail in the country's coffin, this situation isn't peculiar to Pakistan alone. Lots of countries also experience trade deficits, but the potential consequences aren't nearly as dire for them. In the same vein, Pakistan wouldn't be the first country to seek foreign loans from other nations to help offset its negative balance. However, like any other debt, there is a decent chance for it to turn bad. This is one such case where debt turned bad. Given Pakistan's history of economic and financial mismanagement, this outcome isn't exactly improbable. In fact, the country sacked its Prime Minister, Imran Khan, a little over a year ago in a no-confidence motion. This move to remove the 22nd Prime Minister was encouraged by the military, who frowned at Khan's anti-Western sentiments, which helped court the notion that Pakistan was China's lapdog. However, whilst it appeared that the military simply intended to create a Pakistan that had its own identity, all they really did was swap out a bunch of corrupt politicians for another. From the outside looking in, this appears as no more than a premeditated move to conserve power, rather than provoke widespread changes. And if you're wondering why the military sank its teeth into the pie of a democracy, that's because military involvement in Pakistan stretches all the way back to the country's independence in 1947. So, the military tends to play puppeteer behind the scenes or seize power for themselves. Then again, this is encouraged, with the political class almost always relying on the military to correct the balance of power with other political players without a care for how it affects the country. Of course, when the military is incentivized to pursue short-term gains above everything else, there will be consequences. In fact, the consequences are obvious today, with the role of the government being corroded over time and certain groups lacking adequate representation where it matters. Suffice it to say that for such a young democracy, a lot hasn't been done to nurture it to strength and maturity. Of military and unchecked consequences. Seeing as military involvement is part and parcel of the Pakistani government, is it any surprise that their influence exceeds mere politics? Hardly. The military also has a say in the economic activities of the country, with several ex and current personnel assuming important positions in determining the fate of the country's economy. Its influence has been growing since 1954 and currently spans most of the key industries and sectors of the economy, such as housing, telecommunications, power and water. The military also holds the reins to state-owned structures like the National Institute of Health and the Civil Aviation Authority. In unsurprising military fashion, the goings-on in these areas of the economy is neither transparent nor open to public discourse. They exist in total immunity from government accountability, even. It goes without saying that these military-run sectors only serve a select few. If that isn't terrifying on its own, the wealthier the military grows, the higher their political power. Like the average politician's lies, the military tends to justify its involvement in economic activities as its own unique way of contributing to the socioeconomic growth of the nation. But if it tastes and smells like doo-doo, it's either hot caca or manure. Despite claiming to be helping the nation, the military continues to dip into the defense and overall national budget. In an effort to cover up the internal rot, the military uses state resources or the defense budget to make up for financial deficits in their books. The bigger picture. Perhaps the biggest display of military involvement in Pakistan is how a meager 2.4% of the nation's GDP is spent on education compared to the 17.8% directed towards the military. This puts Pakistan's education allocation in the lowest ranks amongst their other South Asian neighbors. But it gets worse. In an attempt to overturn Pakistan's anti-Western image imposed by the recently ousted Prime Minister, the military has encouraged capitalism. However, due to its internal zero-transparency economy, this free market is as good as a $3 bill and riddled with hidden costs. Is there hope for change? Pakistan is in dire need of a hard reset. Arguably, the best course of action would be to send every politician and military personnel on an extended vacation to the afterlife, but that would be far-fetched and impractical. The current dispensation is corrupt beyond repair, and the system would only worsen the longer they stay. One might argue that letting the country crumble under the weight of its corruption would make for an unforgettable lesson. And it will. However, letting the situation fester and devolve into anarchy would be a bad risk for one reason: nuclear arms. Should those weapons fall into the wrong hands, we can just about count Pakistan as yet another North Korea. Instead, this is the time for the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank to step in. Pakistan is no stranger to receiving aid from these institutions, with its most recent relief coming in the form of a $6 billion bailout in 2019. Now seems about as good a time as any. However, aid might not be so quick to come by given the history of the Pakistani ruling class with financial mismanagement, especially as the country nears another election. In this case, the most plausible cause of action would be restructuring Pakistan's external debts. The current debt level is unsustainable, and the country is at risk of becoming another Greece. Unfortunately, this restructuring will shave years of development of the country's economy, reversing advancements in several key areas of Pakistani society, including healthcare, education, and overall prosperity levels. However, there isn't much of an option. The consequences cannot be avoided.